This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel's allies in America push back against the Iran deal. John Kerry and Senate Democrats are feeling the heat, and presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee comes under fire for comparing the Iran deal to the Nazi genocide of the Jews. Plus, an Israeli couple finds a 2,000-year-old treasure under their floor. All this and more on this week's Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in this week for Chris Mitchell here in our Jerusalem studio. Israel supporters in the U.S. Congress are putting the heat on Democrats and the Obama administration over the Iran deal. Republicans are united against the agreement and the public is skeptical of it. So will the Democrats support the president or stand with Israel? Secretary of State John Kerry went before Congress to defend the plan, but he ran into some very strong opposition. Charlene Aron has the story.
Secretary of State John Kerry faced tough questions from members of both parties in the House hearing.
Let me underscore, the alternative to the deal that we have reached is not some kind of unicorn fantasy that contemplates Iran's complete capitulation.
In a tense exchange at times, Kerry, Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, and Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew defended the deal between Iran and 6 nations, aimed at preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Kerry was hoping to coax skeptical lawmakers into supporting the nuclear pact. He warned that walking away would send the wrong message internationally.
If we walk away alone. Our partners are not going to be with us.
But lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns about the details of the agreement, with many questioning if Iran will actually live up to the deal.
Iran has cheated on every agreement they've signed. So I ask, Mr. Secretary, has Iran earned the right to be trusted?
With Republicans basically united in their opposition to the plan, the president is looking to Democrats for support, but many are skeptical, especially since Israel is 100% opposed to it. House Foreign Affairs ranking Democratic member Elliot Engel of New York said he was very disappointed with the agreement.
I have a fundamental concern that 15 years from now, Iran will essentially be off the hook.
But the White House is working hard to get Democrats to approve the deal, with the president personally meeting with and calling Democratic lawmakers to ask for their support. Congress is set to vote on the bill in mid-September, and with much of the public skeptical of the deal, the pressure is expected to intensify on both sides. President Obama has threatened to veto any move to reject the plan. Charlene Aron, CBN News.
Republican presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee is not backing down, accusing President Obama of pushing the Jewish state toward another Holocaust. Last week, Huckabee said the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran is, quote, marching the Israelis to the door of the oven. Democrat leaders are blasting Huckabee for the comment, but the former Arkansas governor says the president is naive to trust the Iranians. The Islamic regime in Tehran has publicly vowed to wipe Israel off the map and calls for death to America. Huckabee is calling on Congress to reject the Iranian deal. It's been almost 5 years since the so-called Arab Spring, with political freedom protests swept across the Middle East. Many around the world expected democratic reform, but saw chaos instead. CBN's Scott Ross asked expert Caroline Glick about trends in the Middle East and Israel.
Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and yet, for decades, has been blamed for much of the trouble in the region. Now, oddly enough, Israel has remained strong while surrounded by enemies and chaos.
So one island of safety and tranquility and peace is Israel. The only country that's a coherent nation state, an organic nation state in this region, is the Jewish state. Every other state you see either collapsing or on the verge of collapse and struggling in order to survive.
Born in Chicago, Caroline Glick immigrated to Israel at age 21, joined the IDF, became involved in politics, and at one time advised Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on foreign policy.
There's a misconception that this whole problem that we're seeing now exploding in our faces throughout these areas is somehow or another a function of the absence of a Palestinian state in the land of Israel.
Glick says that's not true. U.S. administrations have tried for decades to resolve the conflict by trying to force Israel to give up its biblical homeland in order to create a Palestinian state.
If you lay the blame for the absence of peace and stability in the Middle East on the Jewish state, then you have a way out. You don't have to confront any of the real difficulties that are inherent to the failed systems of governance that the Arabs have adopted for themselves over the past 100 years.
Glick says the real problem is that Israel's neighbors never accepted its existence.
Big picture. What's the grand theme in the Middle East these days?
The unraveling of the state system that was instituted here at the end of World War I by the British and the French.
Following World War I, the League of Nations carved up the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Over the years, those areas became states and gained independence, but were mostly ruled by kings or dictators.
All of these dynastic orders that were established by them to encompass states are being stressed, if not breaking. The whole concept of a balance of power between the Sunnis and the Shiites, all of this is going out the window.
Glick says the recent disintegration of regional regimes has led to power vacuums being filled by radical Islam.
You have spoilers coming in and taking advantage of the power vacuum, whether it's ISIS on the Sunni side or it's the Iranians on the Shiite side with Hezbollah as their strike force.
With them, all this infighting going on, isn't that an advantage for Israel?
Israel has to be much more wary. We have to be much more vigilant in protecting our borders, and I dare say we have to be much more vigilant in integrating our own Arab minority into our society for two reasons. One, because it's the right thing to do, and the second reason is because you see massive attempts by ISIS and other terrorist organizations, as well as the Iranian regime, to infiltrate and penetrate Israel's Arab population as well as the Palestinians for the purpose of them fomenting wars against us from inside.
What about the relationship between Israel and Iran?
I think Iran really is the principal danger. I mean, it's been argued that ISIS is far less dangerous than Iran because they're so brutal and they're so monstrous that they have far less ability to maintain themselves over time. On the other hand, Iran is a regime that has managed to survive the test of time since the revolution in 1979.
And now, some 35 years later, Iran has advanced weapon systems, is trying to go nuclear, and is using regional chaos to expand its empire. To make matters worse, U.S.-Israel relations are on rocky ground.
The United States has always been an ally of Israel, support of Israel, but recently it seems there is a real stress on that relationship.
The Obama administration is changing sides, essentially, unfortunately, by siding with Iran against Israel, against the Sunnis. He has this idea, I assume, that he can rejigger the balance of power by removing the United States as the main influencer and controller of this region. But what we see is that that isn't true. There is no balance of power. What there is a nuclear arms race now ensuing because of America's nuclear policy towards Iran.
Despite the seeming Middle East meltdown, Glick says she has hope for the future.
There is strong support in the United States, different parts of the world, from the Christian world. Right. How important is that?
It's critical because I think that, strategic wisdom can stem from many sources, and the Bible is one of those sources.
Are you hopeful for the future, or do you feel like you're a voice crying in the wilderness?
I'm hopeful for the future because, like you, I believe in God, and I have faith not only in the God of Israel, but also in the people of Israel.
Praying for the peace of Jerusalem, do you think prayer makes a difference?
Of course it makes a difference.
Yeah.
I hope it does anyway, because I find myself praying even when I'm not thinking about it. So hope I'm not wasting all that energy, but I'm fairly certain that I'm not. No, I think that prayer is extremely important.
Scott Ross, Jerusalem.
Jonathan Pollard, the American serving a life sentence for passing hundreds of classified documents to Israel, will be released in November. Israel has long pressed for his release, and some U.S. administrations have tried to use him as a bargaining chip in peace talks with the Palestinians. Pollard's supporters say he only tried to help a U.S. ally, while critics charge he risks U.S. foreign policy for money. The Obama administration says Pollard's release is not an attempt to do Israel a favor because of its opposition to the Iranian nuclear deal. Up next, for the first time, Turkey bombs ISIS targets in Syria. But does it have an ulterior motive for stepping into the conflict? Welcome back. Turkey stepped into the war against ISIS this week. Warplanes bombed ISIS targets in Syria, but they're also targeting Kurdish camps in northern Iraq. Turkey has been fighting Kurdish rebels for more than 30 years. Some of them are linked to Peshmerga fighters taking on ISIS. It's all part of the confused and conflicted history of the region. Recently, CBN's George Thomas spoke with Marvi Tahirilu of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies about the emerging conflict between Turkey and the Kurds.
Why has the Turks suddenly decided to jump into the fight against ISIS?
So the official reason for it is last Monday's terrorist attack. There was an ISIS-linked suicide bombing in Turkey. It killed 32 people and wounded over 100. And that's the official reason for why Turkey is now entering officially the war against ISIS. But there's also the fear of the Kurds in Syria making too much territorial gain along Turkey's border. And they think that the Kurds are going to be the next one fighting ISIS in Jarablus, across the last territory that ISIS has left outside of Turkey's border. And they're worried that if Turkey doesn't step up its own fight against ISIS and clear that area of ISIS itself, the Kurds are going to do it and have a continuous territory along right across from Turkey's border.
Okay, so the Turks here, let me get this right, they aren't only going after ISIS, but now they're also bombing Kurdish fighters, the so-called PKK group, who have incidentally been helping the U.S. fight ISIS. So now the Turks are fighting both sides of the same war.
From Turkey's perspective, from Ankara's perspective, they're both equally a threat to Turkey. So it makes sense for Turkey to want to fight them both, but it does present a conundrum for the anti-ISIS coalition led by the United States, because, as you mentioned, the Kurds are the most effective force on the ground fighting ISIS.
Kurds have long sought an independent state, and are their recent territorial gains only fueling those aspirations, and as a result are the Turks afraid of this happening? Because you do have a large population of Kurds in Turkey, Syria, as well as Iraq.
Yes, and they're very near each other too. So you have a very large Kurdish population inside Turkey, right, along the borders of Iraq and Syria. If the Kurds have Jarablus, this area in which Turkey wants to create this safe zone, then you would see that along Turkey's border, their territories, the Kurdish territories, Kobani, Tel Abyad, with Jarablus would now be connected, and you would have a contiguous strip of Kurdish-controlled strip right outside of the border. That is what's fueling this fear that Turkey has of the PYD gaining more territory.
And I'm curious, Marve, how are Kurds in Turkey responding to this? I mean, do you see that perhaps the Kurds might try to launch, those within the country, within Turkey, some kind of assault, some kind of attacks on the streets of Istanbul?
In terms of a big attack in a place like Istanbul, I think we should be worried about ISIS. Right. ISIS actually has nothing to lose. ISIS has networks inside Turkey, and Turkey is now declaring open war against ISIS. So I think that blowback is going to be much worse. Turkish territory, the Turkish border with Syria has been the primary place through which foreign fighters have been going into Syria and joining ISIS. Oil smuggling has been taking place through this border, which has probably made ISIS billions of dollars. I mean, we see the figures are disputed, but it has absolutely made them money. And so both financially, in terms of manpower, Turkey has allowed ISIS to grow. So it wasn't just that Turkey didn't join the fight actively against ISIS. It also turned a blind eye to ISIS activities along its border that actually helped the organization organization grow.
Making this all even more complicated is the fact that Western intelligence now believes there's a link between Turkey and ISIS. What are the implications for U.S.-Turkey relations as a result of that?
What we're seeing is that, yes, there have been, the USB drive that was recently recovered showed reportedly that Ankara has been linked to ISIS. Well, look, I think it's normal for a group like ISIS to have some sort of contact with Turkey. We need to look at how far does that contact extend? Does it go into cooperation, or is it just about, okay, you have my hostages, how are we going to secure that? Is it merely just communication? I think that's a question that needs to be resolved. But Turkey now joining the fight actively against ISIS, joining the anti-ISIS coalition, is also going to appease those questions, right? Because saying, look, stop accusing me of having a contact with this group. I'm now actively bombing this group with you.
Mavi, thank you so much. Mavi is with the group out of Washington, D.C., Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for shedding some insight on this very, very complicated mess in the heart of the Middle East. Thanks for joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Up next, the women of ISIS. Why are young Western women leaving their homes to join a brutal terrorist group? Welcome back. A shocking number of young women are among the thousands of Westerners headed to the Middle East to join ISIS. But why would a woman leave her home and family to link up with these vicious terrorists? Eric Steckelbeck takes a look at the women of jihad.
For months before Shannon Conley's arrest, FBI agents met with her repeatedly. They warned the 19-year-old Muslim convert that her plan to travel to Syria and help ISIS was illegal. Conley, however, had made up her mind. She wanted to leave her suburban Denver home to marry an ISIS fighter she had met online. Agents stopped her at Denver's airport before she could carry out her plan. Yet there are many more like her. Last month, 3 teenage girls, also from suburban Denver, were detained while trying to make their way to Syria. But hundreds of other young women from Western countries have made it to the Islamic State, marrying ISIS fighters and even fighting alongside them.
I have a huge concern regarding the women going back, because that's, again, a part of building a new society. That's the marketing that's going on. And a lot of women here are finding that an attractive option.
Bob Fletcher is the former sheriff of Ramsey County in Minnesota, which includes the city of St. Paul. At least 4 Somali women from St. Paul and neighboring Minneapolis have traveled to Syria to join ISIS in recent months.
While they're recruiting men, they promise them wives when they get there. They need women in their society to keep their fighters content. It's a scary thing, but the women are really being used in a variety of ways once they get there.
In some cases, these women act as much more than mere jihadi brides. A group of British women reportedly leads an all-female Sharia police unit inside the ISIS-controlled Syrian city of Raqqa. These British citizens enforce Islamic dress codes and even reportedly run a brothel where they provide sex slaves to ISIS fighters. So far, most of the ISIS women come from Europe. The numbers include at least 50 British women, 40 from Germany, and some 60 French girls and young women, all leaving their homes to join the Islamic State. The so-called poster girls for this movement are a pair of Austrian teenagers who are believed to be living in Syria and married to ISIS fighters. The girls are reportedly pregnant and want to come home.
Al-Qaeda, extremists, what they call ISIS, Al-Shabaab, I believe for the girls, they're using their element of surprise.
There is a precedent for female terrorists. Dozens of Muslim women from Chechnya and Dagestan have carried out suicide bombings against Russian targets in recent years. But ISIS is taking things to another level by actively recruiting women online. ISIS promises them husbands and a wonderful new life in the caliphate, a place where, ironically enough, women have no rights or freedoms. Eric Stackelbeck, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, an Israeli family makes an amazing discovery right under their living room floor. Welcome back. If you dig in Jerusalem, you never know what you might find. One family recently discovered an important treasure from the time of Jesus in what's believed to be the hometown of John the Baptist. We visited the family, and they showed us what they found under their floor. After Tal and Oria bought an old home in Jerusalem, they wanted to renovate. That project led to a big surprise.
One day during the work with heavy machines, the machine just slipped down. It disappeared. So we figured that there is something, there is a hole. So we stopped working with the machines and we started digging with our hands. And we found out that there is something. We didn't really know exactly what it was.
Here, under their living room floor, they found a 2,000-year-old mikveh, a Jewish ritual bath.
We were a little afraid or concerned about the whole process with the antiquity authorities. We didn't know what's going to happen with our house, if we will be able to keep our private, normal life.
So the family kept their discovery a secret for almost 3 years.
But it kept talking to us, and we kept feeling that there is something important here that doesn't belong only to us.
That led them to contact authorities. By law, any antiquities found while building must be reported, and in a country with thousands of years of history, that can happen anywhere.
I saw a huge ritual bath, complete, dating to the Second Temple time.
While we agreed not to show the home from the outside, we can tell you that it's located in En-Kerem, which has its own place in history.
From the beginning of the 6th century AD, Christianity identified the neighborhood of En-Kerem with the birthplace of John the Baptist, where Elizabeth, the mother of John, met Miriam, the mother of Jesus.
According to archaeologist Amit Raem, they found pottery and stone vessels inside the mikveh.
So must be somebody maybe very important, some kind of priest, live here in this neighborhood, had a ritual bath.
Oria said she wonders about the people who lived in this place.
I'm trying to listen to the story that they left behind. It's something very strong to live with.
But for now, they'll put their lives back in order.
I guess we'll close the doors, we'll put the carpet, we'll put the chairs, and we'll try to go back to our lives with knowing that something very important belongs to the story of this place and to the story of our life.
It's amazing what hidden things come to the light. And remember, no matter what's going on in the world today, the God who is watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. Well, that's it for this edition. See you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.